Hello, and warm greetings to this presentation on a really important topic. If someone told you in confidence that they had been sexually abused, how would you react? Would you listen to a child the same way you would listen to an adult? If the abuse was committed by a relative or a person in authority like a priest or a sports coach, would it make a difference? What about the situation where someone is telling you about a confidence they themselves received from a victim of abuse? In this video, we would like to share some best practices that have been acquired over the decades concerning how to receive and react to an allegation of sexual abuse. My name is Paul-André Durocher. I'm the Archbishop of Gatineau. I'm also chair of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops' Standing Committee on Responsible Ministry and the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Persons. Established in 2018, the mandate of this committee is to gather and disseminate information based on research, reflections, and recommendations on issues and concerns related to sexual abuse by clergy. The committee addresses the issues of healing and prevention in a comprehensive manner, recognizing the full range of consequences for victims, families, local communities, society, and religious faith. The Standing Committee is composed of professionals who are qualified in fields related to the committee's mandate, such as child protection, law, and psychology, in addition to a few bishops and survivors of clerical sexual abuse. In 2018, the conference published a reference document for all dioceses in Canada entitled Protecting Minors from Sexual Abuse, a call to the faithful of Canada for healing, transformation, and reconciliation. It replaces the original CCCB guidelines issued in 1992 and their 2007 update. This document reflects the most recent legislation in Canada, the norms and expectations of the Holy See, and the opinions of many experts and especially survivors of clerical sexual abuse. One key provision in this document is that all diocesan bishops designate a person to receive reports of wrongdoing by clergy or any person mandated or employed in the Church. Over the years, we've learned a great deal from these delegates who have shared with us their experiences of listening and the many challenges they face when receiving a denunciation. This video aims to help them in this delicate and important service by identifying these challenges and suggesting attitudes and behaviors that will respond to them. We also anticipate that this video will be useful to anyone to whom a victim of sexual abuse confides their experience and reports their abuser. Whether we are relatives, friends, colleagues, or employers, whether in a church, community, professional, or family setting, we're all likely to find ourselves with someone who's been a victim of a deplorable criminal act and who wishes to confide in us. It's important then to know how to listen and accompany the person who takes us into their confidence and opens up to us in all their vulnerability. I hope what follows will be useful to you, and I hope it helps you truly listen to those who dare confide to you their deepest fears and pains. God bless you.
Hello, I am Delphine Collin-Vizina, psychologist and full professor at McGill University. Since the beginning of my career, more than 20 years ago, I've always been interested in the issue of sexual abuse, with the hope of contributing, even on a small scale, to reducing the number of victims in our communities, providing better support for those who unfortunately go through this experience, and helping them through the healing process. I recently had the opportunity to collaborate with the Archdiocese of Montreal in their desire to initiate a victim shift, an approach that puts the abused person at the heart of the process. I'm also a member of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops' Standing Committee for Responsible Ministry and the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Persons. This presentation is influenced by the rich partnerships I have developed with them. In the first part of this presentation, I would like to review with you the false beliefs that are still present in our society and that can sometimes cloud our judgment and our ability to believe the victim who is revealing what he or she has experienced. The first misconception is that sexual abuse is an issue that affects few people and very few boys. The reality is that there's a lot of research that indicates that 1 in 5, even 1 in 4 women, as well as 1 in 10 men, have been sexually abused before the age of 18. The second misconception is that there must be physical contact or even penetration in order for it to be considered sexual abuse. In fact, both touching and non-contact forms of sexual abuse can occur. Examples include exhibitionism and voyeurism. The third misconception is that sexual abuse always involves violence. Some sexual acts are committed through the use of coercion and force, but most are committed through manipulation. The abuser, who is in a position of responsibility, trust, or power, can take advantage of and coerce the victim without necessarily using physical violence. The fourth misconception is that the majority of abuse is committed by a stranger. Unfortunately, it is estimated that 9 out of 10 victims know their abuser. It is precisely through this bond of trust that the abuser manipulates and intimidates the victim and makes him or her feel confused about the abuse and less likely to talk about it. The fifth misconception is that sexual abuse only occurs in certain social classes, cultures, or dysfunctional families. In fact, sexual abuse occurs in all cultures, communities, and social classes. This type of abuse is independent of family functionality, as abusers can gain the trust of both functional and dysfunctional families. The sixth misconception is that abusers are only men. Although men are most often involved as abusers, it is estimated that 5% of abuse is committed by women. It is important to recognize this reality, as victims may be particularly confused about what they have experienced, as this form of abuse may be minimized or even ignored. The seventh misconception is that victims are consenting if they're having a physiological reaction to the abuse. Physiological reactions, such as an erection or lubrication, are common in victims of sexual abuse and are the result of a natural reflex mechanism that cannot be compared to sexual pleasure or desire. This reaction can make the victim even more confused and ashamed. The eighth misconception is the belief that victims could prevent the abuse from happening by avoiding certain people and using common sense to protect themselves. The reality is that this belief places totally inappropriate responsibility on the victim, denying the fact that the abuser manipulates and uses different strategies to get his or her way. Abused people have had the misfortune of meeting an abuser, and the responsibility always falls entirely on the abuser, not the victim. The ninth misconception is the belief that people who were sexually abused as children, especially men, are more likely to commit sexual assault as adults. In fact, the majority of sexual abuse survivors, both male and female, will not become sexual abusers. And a history of sexual victimization is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for committing a sexual offense. The factors or conditions for sexual abuse to occur are much more diverse and complex. The final misconception is that if stories of abuse are true, people will quickly disclose them. It is this last misconception that will be discussed in the second part of this presentation. Despite recent social movements and prevention campaigns that encourage victims and survivors to disclose their abuse and seek professional help, victims often delay reporting or never do so. Disclosure is not just a matter of courage. There are in fact multiple barriers that prevent abused people from disclosing, such as fear of retaliation, shame, guilt, fear of not being believed, threats from the abuser. When the person discloses abuse, the most important thing is to be in a position to listen and show respect. The person is seeking first and foremost to be believed and validated in his or her experience. So we can say, "Thank you for trusting me by telling me about this event. I am very saddened by what you're telling me." And above all, we can emphasize to the victim that he or she did the right thing by talking about it. It is normal for the person receiving the disclosure to feel angry, helpless, and saddened by the disclosure, but they should always regulate their own emotions and show compassion. If you are very angry or on the verge of tears, the discloser may feel that they should not have told you. So we need to find the right balance between being empathetic without being overwhelmed by our own emotions. Disclosure is a difficult and sensitive process that must be met with empathy and sensitivity, given the enormous risk that the victim takes in deciding to disclose. The following presentations given by Sister Accompany and Professor Desmesures will make this process more concrete, and we hope will help you feel better equipped to receive disclosures and to play this important role of providing support to victims.
I am Sister Marie-Josée Accompany, servant of the Holy Heart of Mary. Since my early childhood, I have been animated by the desire to help the vulnerable. This desire first led me to consecrate myself to the Lord in a congregation whose charism and mission are oriented towards helping the most disadvantaged people in our society, especially women and children. After several years of ministry, my desire led me to study counseling and spirituality at St. Paul University in Ottawa. After obtaining my master's degree, this same desire led me to the Southdown Institute, where I am currently a member of the clinical team. In this presentation, I would like to discuss active listening in a disclosure situation. Taking the time to listen to someone who is experiencing distress is therapeutic, as it allows you to establish a quality relationship with that person. At the same time, listening to the other person is the cornerstone of helping them. Your ability to actively listen to a person who has been abused is a valuable skill, given the secrecy that very often surrounds these acts. Listening to the victim is therefore a cornerstone of the help you provide. It is also the best way to show respect. But this is not always easy in a world full of distractions. The phone, the TV, the inner whisper, etc. In this sense, listening becomes an art that you acquire through practice. For quality active listening, I suggest 3 main aspects you need to act on: your own person, the verbal aspects, and the non-verbal aspects. When it comes to yourself, it is a good idea to make an effort to listen carefully to the person, because this is a subject that is important to them. Take what the person says seriously, even if you can't believe that the accused person could have caused this harm. Experience has taught us that we should listen to what we are told, even if it is hard to believe. It is good to validate the person. How do we do this? By simply being present. It's about actively listening to the other person and paying close attention. Validation is not agreement. You can validate without accepting someone's point of view. Focus on the person, what they are experiencing, and their point of view without passing judgment. When you are focused on what the person is reporting to you, show your interest through verbal and non-verbal cues. Nonverbal. Watch your posture. Sit up straight, but be comfortable. Face the person directly. Make eye contact while the other person is talking, but don't be too insistent. Limit distractions. Be present and attentive. Push out extraneous thoughts. When you are actively listening, you should avoid looking at your phone, your watch, or other people. Nod your head occasionally to indicate that you are listening. Watch your facial expressions so that you don't express disagreement, irritation, or negative emotions before you hear the person out. You can respond later. Try to ensure your facial expressions, eyebrows, and general demeanor are consistent with the tone of the conversation. For example, when someone is confiding in you, your face should reflect compassion. Verbally, you can demonstrate your interest by asking questions for clarification to show that you are really trying to understand. It is helpful to occasionally summarize the idea you just heard. Then, the other person can approach an idea with the confidence that you are really listening. Make sure you understand everything. Can say, let me recap to make sure I understand. This is a way to clear up any confusion. To summarize, what I hear you saying is that correct? Use onomatopoeia such as ah, oh no, or unbelievable to show that you are practicing active listening. Listening with your full attention means remaining neutral and caring. It is best to hear the other person speak without forming an opinion until he or she has finished speaking. In other words, don't give free rein to preconceived ideas and banish any attempt at interpretation. Allow the person to speak without interruption. This usually involves brief periods of silence, perhaps a few seconds. Don't be afraid to be silent when appropriate. You don't always have to respond or comment. In active listening, letting the other person speak without interruption also means avoiding finishing sentences for him or her, as you may make mistakes. While you are listening, try to close your internal dialogue because it is difficult to listen carefully to the other person and your own internal voice at the same time. It is better to save your reactions for last. You can then say reassuring phrases such as, I sympathize with you. I see that this affects you a lot. Avoid probing, asking repeated questions, or asking the person to repeat what he or she has said. Do not seek help while the person is talking to you. Never press for information, doubt the person's disclosure, or make promises you cannot keep. Avoid denying or minimizing the importance of the person's problems and needs, and also avoid using demeaning language or adopting a judgmental attitude. For example, it would not be appropriate to say to someone, you should have told someone about this before, or I can't believe it, I'm shocked. Active listening and empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of the person who has been abused. Try to feel what they are feeling while they are talking to you. Imagine yourself in her situation. How would you feel? How will you react? This is the practice of empathy. Empathy is about seeing the world as the other person does and truly putting yourself in their shoes. To empathize, we must be open-minded, learn to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, and communicate our acceptance of their experience in an appropriate way. Empathy will make it easier to communicate with the person. It will also help the victim tell you about their stressful and difficult to explain experience. There are several types of empathic listening: make space, reflecting, and responding. Making space involves making room for the message being delivered through verbal and non-verbal cues. Eye contact and responsive body language are examples of making space. Reflecting involves mirroring back to the person what they said to us. Try not to equate your own ideas when you reflect, and simply focus on projecting the same emotions and words that are being expressed to you. Reassure the other person that their reaction is reasonable and that anyone else in their situation would feel the same way. The third form of listening, reaction, is the most common form. Reactions do not have to be global or significant. They can be subtle, such as when we nod along with the speaker. Our reactions and reflections should not be about our own views, but rather indicate that we have understood the other person's. Ask questions to clarify and show that you are really trying to understand or to summarize. What I hear you saying is, isn't it? That is an example. Active listening is not easy. It is an art that takes a lot of practice and that can sometimes be challenging. I hope these strategies will help you in your practice to offer victims of abuse the attentive ear and open heart that they seek when they come to you to make a disclosure.
I am Carlijn Demazure, Professor Emeritus and Founding Director of the Center for Safeguarding Minors and Vulnerable Persons at St. Paul University in Ottawa. I have been working in the field of abuse prevention for over 25 years and in various countries. Like Dr. Delphine Colin-Vezina, I am a member of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops Standing Committee for Responsible Ministry and the Protections of Minors and Vulnerable Persons. In this short presentation, I would like to focus on 3 points. First, that abuse cannot remain secret. Second, the importance of reporting abuse to the appropriate authorities. And finally, the need to make a written report after the disclosure of abuse. The first element is secrecy. The victim keeping the abuse secret is very important to the abuser. Only then can he or she continue to abuse that victim or others while maintaining his or her reputation. Very often, this abuser will try to convince the victim to remain silent about the abuse. He or she may tell the victim that they will not be believed, or that disclosing will have a negative impact on the victim or his family. The abuser will use blackmail and manipulation by telling the victim that he could end up in jail, that his loved ones would be hurt, that his family would no longer be welcome in the community. This does not only apply to children. To the vulnerable adult, the abuser might say that it was she, the victim, who wanted this situation, and that no one will believe that he, who is so loved in the community, could have done such a thing. The person who wants to disclose is therefore very often afraid and might ask or even beg you to keep confidential what he or she is telling you. It is important to explain the need to stop keeping abuse secret. Disclosure cannot be limited to the two of you. To end the abuse and begin the long process of healing, the secret must be broken. Breaking the silence allows this process to begin, including freeing up speech and getting the necessary psychological and legal help. The second point I want to make in this presentation is the importance of reporting abuse to the authorities. Each province, each region, each country has its own rules regarding the need to report abuse. So it's important to be aware of that. For example, in the case of Quebec, when the person is a minor, which means under the age of 18, the law requires that youth protection be made aware of the facts. In the case of Ontario, however, the Children's Aid Society must be notified only for youth 15 years of age and under. So, the strict duty to report does not apply to a child who is 16 or 17, but a person may report to a society about a 16 or 17-year-old. The Children's Aid Society will decide whether to report the abuse to the police. This is what the law says in Ontario. However, in other provinces, the duty to report applies to all young people before the age of 18. Again, it's important to know the law in your own province, region, or country. And what about suspicion of abuse? If one has reasonable grounds to suspect abuse, the person shall immediately report the suspicion and the information on which it is based. In the meantime, while waiting for civil services to take action, it is important to make sure that the person is safe. Finding a place to go following an incident can be difficult for both children and adults. Victims are often isolated, as the abuse have removed them from their social network. They do not longer have relationships outside the community where they have been abused, and they do not know where to go. In this sense, it is important to ensure that a person's mental and physical health is taken care of and to refer them to social and medical services when necessary. With regard to abuse committed by a priest, religious, or layperson who has a function in the church, the Catholic Church also invites to report the abuse. If the person who knows about the abuse is a priest or religion, he or she is even obliged to do so. It is important to contact the delegate or service responsible in your diocese, even if you have already informed the civil services. The Archbishop will explore a bit more on that. Generally, if there is a legal case, the Church will wait for the outcome of that investigation before it proceeds. Although reporting to child protection does not apply to adults, even those considered vulnerable, for example because of a disability or precarious immigration status, the secrecy must also be broken, and in the Church the abuse must be reported. Canada and other countries have laws that protect adults in vulnerable situations. Reporting is often the only way to stop the abuse. The final point I want to make in this presentation is the importance of the written report following the disclosure. Once we have been able to listen to the victim and make sure the victim is safe, then it's time to write a report. The person who has listened to the victim's story may be tempted to postpone this task until after they have dealt with the emotions of the disclosure. However, it is important to write it down as soon as possible after the disclosure while the memory is still clear. The report should be as objective as possible. The objective data to be recorded are as follows. Who reported the abuse? Was it the victim him or herself, or a third party, such as parents or a teacher? When was the report made? Where, at what time and how? By email, by phone, in person? What kind of abuse is it? We have focused on sexual abuse in this training, but is there also suspicion of physical or psychological abuse or even spiritual abuse? And who committed the abuse? When was the abuse committed? If a third party is reporting a suspected event experienced by someone else, we ask what caused the suspicion and when. What did this person observe or hear? After taking note of the objective data, the person who listened to the story of abuse can make a record of how the conversation went, for his own or her own memory, or because it is required by diocesan policy. If possible, write down what was said verbatim. Do not organize the story, but follow the order as the person followed it. Write down your considerations and opinions separately. A good report can help prevent a victim from having to repeat the abuse story over and over again. It is a way to support the victim in her journey.
Allow me to remind you of a few procedural elements. First, if a priest, pastoral worker, or employee of the Catholic Church receives an allegation from a victim or someone who reports possible abuse of a third party, he or she must inform the bishop's delegate as soon as possible. In addition, if the victim is still a minor, the person who received the allegation must notify the civil authorities responsible for child protection in their province. As for the person delegated by the bishop to receive these complaints, he or she should inform the bishop in the advisory committee as soon as possible. It's good to know that the bishop will promptly launch a preliminary investigation, unless the case has been reported to the police, which we always encourage the victim to do, or if the complaint is truly unfounded. The results of this preliminary investigation will be submitted to the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome, which will determine the next steps in judging the case. Throughout this process, the bishop's delegate will endeavor to inform the person who has made the complaint of the progress of the process and the steps taken. The bishop's delegate will seek to offer the complainant the support he or she needs throughout the process. In conclusion, on behalf of the CCCB Standing Committee for Responsible Ministry, I'd like to thank the people who helped make this video possible. And I'd like to thank you, dear listeners, for your attention and your commitment to every wounded person in our church and in our society. May God our Father renew in you the spirit of wisdom and compassion so that you bring the love of Christ to the heart of the world.